So the game finished, Aston Villa 1, Arsenal 0. And does that mean that Arsenal's title hopes are in tatters? Are we destined for another season of disappointment? I mean, I know we could win the Champions League and the FA Cup, but when it comes to the Premier League, are we facing another year of disappointment? Now, there are lots of things to talk about in that game because it really is difficult to understand how we didn't come away with at least a draw. We played easily well enough to at least come away with the draw, possibly a win. We were the better team on the day. That's not me crying, it's not me saying that we should win every game that we play better. So with the talking points, the general review of the game to discuss what happened, and then I want to look at the state of our squad and what that means for our title challenge this season. What that game illustrated in a broader context of our title charge this season. And okay, let's start with the major talking points. I know Arteta was hamstrung and wasn't able to give his opinion, and I'm not necessarily even sure I would 100% agree with his opinion. Let's begin with the penalty shout against Jesus. Now, I know we saw a similar penalty given in the early kickoff between Liverpool and Crystal Palace. But if I'm honest, I thought that the contact was so minimal. I know that in the current world of football, those penalties are given all the time. I don't think there would have been any major complaints if it had been given. It was a soft penalty if it was given. So really, just the fact that they're often given doesn't give you... I wouldn't want us to concede a penalty in the same circumstances. That's a metric I tend to use. So I'm happy to say, okay, we didn't get a penalty. Perhaps that's just normal. And that's probably for the good of the game. You don't want to see too many soft penalties. But as for the handball, I find this one really difficult. The referee apparently, in real time, sees something that me watching the slow motion VAR replay over and over again, just as it took them 3 minutes to watch it and couldn't come to a definitive conclusion, it probably does touch Martinelli's hand. I don't think it gives him any material advantage in terms of the goal scored. And it also seems to touch Matty Cash's hand. And apparently the onus of proof is heavier if you're giving a penalty for Matty Cash's handball. But he didn't seem to see it. He didn't blow up for it. And it didn't gain Matty Cash a particular advantage either. The problem here isn't that the referee saw something. He probably did see a handball. It looks like it does touch both of their hands. The problem isn't therefore the referee, and the problem isn't VAR, which couldn't conclusively say one way or the other. The problem is the rule, the handball rule. And look, I don't want to be just another voice saying the same thing, but we do have to all accept that the handball rule at the moment is shit. And it needs a massive and major overhaul. We're not the only team who are going to suffer at the hands of, no pun intended, at the hands of this ridiculous handball ruling. The fact that if it touches a hand at all, ignores the idea that if it hasn't gained anyone a material advantage, just actually touching a hand doesn't really mean anything. You always hear people say this, it used to be hand to ball, not ball to hand. And in this case, he clearly isn't trying to touch the ball. It would be fantastic if we could flick a switch right now and change the handball rule back to something much simpler. And give the on-field referee a chance to decide whether it played a part in scoring a goal or not. And before the World Cup in 2026, I guarantee you this rule will have changed. But it hasn't yet, and we're likely to see many more cases of it this season. So overall, is it unfair that we had a goal ruled off because of that handball? The letter of the law is the letter of the law. Whether it's a good law or bad law, we're all equally bound by it, and it's gutting. Because if that goal goes in, the complexion of the game has completely changed, and I think we at least deserved a draw. But you do have to earn the game. So what went wrong? Because it was a completely different game than the one that Aston Villa played against Manchester City, where they completely dominated them and played them off the park. Aston Villa looked sluggish, they were holding on for dear life, and it's really hard to understand how we couldn't have taken at least one of those chances. Let's start with him. Martinelli receives a beautiful crossfield ball from Saka, which he puts on a plate for Saka. And Saka, really unusually for him, doesn't get anywhere near it. It's one of 2 air shots that Saka has, either one of which, if he'd connected with, could have easily been a goal. Martinelli was hooked because, and I've heard a lot of people saying, but he was one of the bright sparks. He was creative. He had that wonderful chance where he nearly crossed the line and it didn't quite. He was creative but he he was giving the ball away a huge amount, and that affects the momentum of the game massively. So I could understand why Trossard came on for him, but Trossard didn't look like he was going to be that impactful. Martin Odegaard with a glorious chance in the first half where he puts the ball too close to Emi Martinez. It can happen. In the second half, he had another chance that goes wide, which on any other day he would have put in. He just wasn't quite sharp enough on the day. Gabi Jesus, who took one too many touches. I know he scored that fantastic goal against Lens where he puts everyone on their backside, but this time the Villa defence was equal to it, and he just took too many chances. In the second half, there was a miscontrol in the area where you would expect Gabi Jesus to bring it down and at least fire off a shot, and he didn't. And just before he was taken off, there was an absolute lack of acceleration. He looked tired. Now, the problem is we have to bring on Eddie Nketiah for him. And that's not exactly inspiring. I'm not a massive fan of Eddie Nketiah, and I hate being negative about any of our players. But when you're bringing him onto a game like that, you just don't think he's going to make a difference. Last season, one of the standout parts of Eddie Nketiah's game was that he was not impactful off the bench, and yesterday he wasn't either. So, do we have enough attackers? Now, everyone is going to say that if we had a 20-goal-a-season guy on that pitch yesterday, that he would have scored. And people have talked about Ollie Watkins as one of those, but he didn't score. In the game against Man City, Manchester City definitely had a goal scorer on the pitch and he didn't score. So it's not always a given that if you have players who can score, they will do. Fatigue, tiredness, sluggishness, these all play a part. Our inability to score goals came down to a really unusual amount of sluggishness, a bit off the pace. But I also want to talk about the goal we conceded because there are some flags there. The first thing is that it's another one of those goals where we are vulnerable on the left-hand side because Zinchenko's in the midfield. Now, he makes a decision to, instead of going towards Bailey, he leaves Bailey to Gabriel, and he does what he thinks is a sensible thing, or probably what he's trained to do, which is cut off any pass to John McGinns. Ben White follows John McGinns, and John McGinn's run seems to take him towards the goal. Ben White oversteps, goes towards the goal, and then finds himself too far from McGinn when he finally gets the ball. McGinn is able to turn and fire a shot, which only just goes past David Raya. Now, I don't want to get into the big Raya Ramsdale, but I can't help thinking that, his reflexes weren't quite good enough to stop a shot that was quite near him. There is a chance there that Ramsdale could have done what he did last season so often, which was why he was in the team of the season last season. Could he have pulled off one of those miracle saves and kept it at 0-0? That conceding an early goal is something that I thought we'd kind of eliminated from our game. And yesterday, it really put us under pressure. So the goal itself was Ben White not quite sharp enough, Zinchenko not quite decisive enough in his action. If he had followed Bailey, he might have been able to take the ball off him. If he had gone towards McGinn, he could have stopped the cross and there could have been two players on McGinn. Neither of those happened. Just sluggish. I'm going to use that word over and over again in this video because that's what it looked like. Let's have a review of why it could be that we looked so off the pace yesterday. Now, I know we had an emotional last gasp winner against Luton that might have drained the energy from some of our players. And this is December and every team. Villa looked sluggish, Man City looked sluggish, Man United looked absolutely woeful. Liverpool didn't look at their best. None of us are playing at 100% sharpness, and that's to be expected. But is there an endemic problem in Arsenal's squad that could be playing a bigger part in this than the other teams might have to face? And for that, I want to look at our squad, the 25 men that we are currently fielding in our Premier League squad. Now, you do need 3 goalkeepers just in case, and Carl Hayne is in there and he's unlikely to play any minutes. But our defence, and I said this at the summer transfer window, when we knew that Jurrien Timber was injured at the end of the window, we could have brought in a replacement and we didn't, which left us very short. Let's look at our defenders. First of all, there's William Saliba, who's played every single minute of every single Premier League game so far this season. And this is a player who had an injury problem last season, which affected, I think, our title challenge. Is it sensible to not have anyone to come in for him? Gabriel alongside him hasn't played every minute because there were those games at the start of the season where he wasn't played, but he's in there. And those two have to play every single game that you want to win. Zinchenko, who I've already said could have done more to stop that goal going in, but overall has been a really good player and has improved defensively. And Ben White, again, who was also partly at fault for John McGinn's goal. I do really like John McGinn. I said before the match that he's my favourite Villa player at the moment. He did what he does best. I know he looks a bit like a Lego man, but he is an excellent player. But Zinchenko, Ben White, Gabriel and Saliba are 4 of our defenders. Jurrien Timber, who's unlikely to play a meaningful part in this season, is another one. Cedric, who's on the bench and hasn't had a single minute. And let's face it, he couldn't get into Fulham's team last season, so it's not like I'm saying he should be playing. Jacob Kivior, who hasn't looked terrible, hasn't looked good enough. If it gets to the point where Saliba picks up an injury because he's had to play too many games, do you want to see Jacob Kivior coming in for either him or Gabriel? And then there's Tomiyasu, who's injured. I don't know if he's injury prone or just really unlucky. He may be out for 4 or 5 weeks, so we can't rely on him. At the moment, we have 5 defenders for all of the games coming up. Not just in December, but if we don't dip into the transfer market in January, you can't see us going on for the rest of the season with just 5 defenders and expecting to mount a title challenge. In midfield, there are problems as well, because Fabio Vieira is injured at the moment, but he hasn't been playing that well. I mean, he's suspended and injured at the moment, but he hasn't been playing that well. And he's had 238 minutes so far this season, which, if you extrapolate it out, you wouldn't expect him to play much more than about 500-600 minutes. So he's not somebody that Arteta seems to be able to rely on. Emil Smith-Rowe is coming back from injury, and he's been really unlucky because just as he was getting into the side, he picked up that injury. Is he injury prone? Can we rely on him? I think we possibly can. He could be somebody that adds something to our squad in the second half of the season. El Neni, he's had 1 minute. That's not a player that you're expecting to come on. Jorginho, who has done a really good job in that midfield. He's been our standing captain. I really like Jorginho, but he's not a player that you'd expect to get a huge number of minutes. Thomas Partey is Thomas Partey, right? So even if he's back fit in January, we don't see him again till February because of the AFCON. And look, it's conceivable that actually if he's fit in February, March, April and May, he could make the difference and give us something so that we can rotate. But absent any of those players, you are expecting Kai Havertz, Martin Odegaard, Declan Rice to play almost every minute of every game. And that's going to lead to the kind of tiredness and fatigue that means they're not 100%. They're still great players. Everyone's allowed an off game, and hopefully they don't all have them at the same time, which is kind of what happened yesterday. But you do need to strengthen that midfield as well. Now, up front, as I've already said, everyone's clamouring for us to get an extra player. But that's an area where we do actually look better. But I will say, Nelson has played 60 minutes this season. What is he doing in our squad? If in the first 16 games of the season he only gets 60 minutes, he's obviously another player that Arteta doesn't think is good enough to come on for Saka or Martinelli or anyone. Eddie Nketiah, and I hate to slag off Arsenal players, and I'm not trying to slag him off, but when Jesus came off yesterday, did anyone think Eddie Nketiah was going to come on and make the difference? Villa were playing a really high line. It should have been the kind of game where Eddie Nketiah could burst into space and pick up the ball, a bit like Saka did for his goal that was just offside. Again, not something you expect from Saka. He could have looked along the line and stayed onside. But we have 3 forwards that have to play every single match, basically. Saka, Martinelli and Jesus have to play all the time. And Jesus has had his injury problems. And if the only player you've got to come in for him is Eddie Nketiah, that's not quite good enough. Trossard came on for Martinelli yesterday and didn't quite look up to the pace, but he's a really good utility player. But I think the forward line, if we could replace Nketiah with a slight upgrade, and I don't think it will be an Ivan Toney, but somebody who's maybe young and can burst in, I would make a case here for Kozia Dubry. But the overarching problem we're going to have is that if we go into the second half of the season with so few defenders and the inability to rotate midfielders, then we are leaving ourselves open for games like the Villa game. Now, I will repeat what I said at the beginning, which is that we played easily well enough to get something out of that game, but we didn't. And we have a really big game coming up against Liverpool at Anfield. And as I've already said, they don't look 100% either, but that's going to be a tough game. The December games, I forecasted we should take 16 points for. I was down to get 1 point from the game yesterday and to get nothing out of the game at Anfield. I think that's fair. I do think that we have enough about us to beat Brighton at home next weekend, but these are not givens. We need to be 100% fit. We've got the midweek game against PSV. Hopefully, we send out a very much weakened team because it is a dead rubber for us. And we give some of these players a chance to rest and recuperate. But this season, if you look at our performance in the first 16 games, it looks like, and just to say that a title-winning team does need to win between 26 and 30 games in order to sort of be at the top of the table. And if you extrapolate our performance in the first 16 games, it looks like we're on course to win 26, draw 7 and lose 5. It's still possible that will be enough to win the title because of all the teams around us. Man City are certainly not the Man City of the last 4 years. They might come good. We might come good. Liverpool are top at the moment, but again, they haven't looked quite the title-winning team either. And all this talk about Aston Villa winning the title, I think, is overblown. I think that we are only likely to win the title if we can go out and strengthen just squad players. I'm not talking about replacing any of the first 11, but what I am saying is you can't expect that first 11 to play every single game. So in summation, our title hopes are not in tatters, provided we can strengthen the squad a little. Provided we can move out Cedric and El Neni and Nelson and replace them with players that Arteta can trust to come off the bench. Provided that Arteta either does that with Edu or has a little more faith in those players. Who knows what Nelson could have done if he'd come on earlier. I'm not massively convinced, but we do need to bring in 3 or 4 players. Do I think that will happen? It's a discussion for another day. I'm going to be doing a live every single day of the transfer window, but I will say going in, I don't expect massive signings. I just want to see us strengthen. Or do we trust some players off the bench? Is Raul Walters going to get some game time? Is Cozy Dubry going to get some game time? I kind of hope they do. It was a disappointing result against Villa. It was my birthday celebration as well. So I watched it with loads of people I love around me. A nice glass of Courvoisier, which kind of balanced it out a little bit. Fantastic meal. And so I'm able to be a bit more circumspect about it. Today, I don't think it was a disastrous performance by us. I said going into the match, I thought we'd give them a much tougher game than Manchester City did. And there's no doubt that we did that. So let's try and be balanced about it. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater and say everything's terrible at the moment. And let's look ahead to the game against Brighton and the game after that against Liverpool, where if we're able to win it, it totally transforms the league again. And I will be watching Manchester City's upcoming games, hoping that they don't put this right. Because going into the start of the season, if you'd said that Man City definitely aren't going to win the league, it makes us favourites. Liverpool have come back as everyone expected them to do. Are they that much better than us? If City don't win the title, and I know that's an if at this point because we've seen what they do in the second half table, but if they don't, aren't we still favourites? Anyway, thank you for watching up till now. Thank you massively for our 666th subscriber. Big love to you.
I'm proud of you, you know that. I hope you do.
And to all of you who've subscribed so far, and if you could just click a like on here, what that means is that somebody else who might like this video will get a chance to see it. And until I see you again, be lucky! Lots of love.